Hello, my name is Lacey, and I decided to present on the Tower of London. I specifically chose the Tower of London because my area of interest is specifically older museums, one with historical collections rather than modern collections, so I thought that this was a good fit for me. The Tower of London has a very interesting history, which I wasn't super aware of. So it all started with William the Conqueror after the Battle of Hastings, and the Tower of London was initially meant to terrify the people, specifically that of the White Tower. The White Tower was used as a symbol of oppression for the British people, and it was built between 1066 and 1100. The Tower of London was used as a prison, fortress, royal palace, a mint, arsenal, and a place of execution. All of these mixed together creates a really interesting background of what we know of the Tower of London today, and it creates a really interesting muddy water. The museum was never called a museum up until the 20th century, but it has always been some version of a museum, whether it has held jewels or held the royals' personal collections, or even a zoo. The debate about a museum, specifically regarding to the zoo, can be an interesting topic, and many people have different viewpoints on that. But in the 1200s, the royals began collecting exotic animals, specifically from the African continent or the Americas during the conquest. And the menagerie was only closed in 1835, which means that the menagerie was open for almost 600 years. Whether that was to the public or just to royals and the nobles is debated. In the 19th century, the crown jewels were displayed, and this display started what we know of the Tower of London today. And the crown jewels was also displayed, and they have a really interesting exchange programs within London. So the location of the Tower of London is very central. So it is right along the Thames, um, and it's also right by the Tower Bridge. Um, City Hall is over here, and it's just a very central location. I mean, there's even a TJ Maxx as well. Um, this location is really important to the people because people are able to access this location, even though it may not be accessible in other ways. So I believe that the most interesting things to see that are very specific are Queen Victoria's mourning dress. So after her husband, King Albert, died, um, she has a very intense way of dress. And during the Victorian period, you had to wear black dress for a set amount of years to say that you're mourning your spouse. Um, what's really interesting about Queen Victoria's is the amount of detail on her dresses and how short they were. So she was about 4 foot, about 4 to 5 feet tall. So all of her dresses are super duper short. Even in the dress shown, it almost looks like a children's dress. And then obviously the crown jewels are what most people go to the Tower of London to see. These are mostly the jewelry that they wear for coronations and are only brought out for coronations typically. Another really interesting thing that I thought we would be able to see is the ravens. So the ravens is a huge part of the Tower of London, and these ravens are actually trained um, specifically to be able to deter people from stealing. So they're trained by, I think it's called the Raven Master, which sounds like a really cool job to me. And it's believed that if these ravens go away, then England itself will fall and the Tower of London will cease to exist. So these ravens are super important to English lore, which is something I really didn't know before I started researching this topic. So the Arts Council England is a designation that certain museums can get that basically says how important they are to the country itself. So it's the National Development Agency for Creativity, and they take public funds and use them to fund art in low-income areas, as well as areas where it's tested and the people in the area are slightly less artistic. And the Royal Dress Ceremonial Collection is a designated collection, which means that it is such a highly prized and sought after collection that it is huge just for the just for England itself. The fund also helps starting artists create a name for themselves, and they give them money and recognition for their arts. What's really important specifically about this is that it connects the Tower of London to other institutions within the area and with the people itself. So the staff is Dr. Alden Gregory. He's a curator of historic buildings, along with Alfred R.J. Hawkins. He's the assistant curator of historic buildings. So the overarching structure of the staff is very specific to the museums. So this museum and then a couple others, I'm not sure what they are, but they all have similar staff and they all share a staff, but each has very specific members of their collection that specify specifically in their works. So Dr. Alden Gregory and Alfred R.J. Hawkins, they are both specifically important for the architecture of the building itself. And then Kate Clements is the curator of collections. But there's also the way that it's set up is because the Tower of London is a national monument, there are several other museums that are under. So it's like like a very large grand scale staff. And then there's one specifically for the museum, which I thought was a really interesting way of doing it rather than just like one specific staff because I think that the Tower of London is probably massive. And I think it's just really interesting that they have such a small staff that isn't specifically designated for the Tower of London. So the Tower of London does a lot to engage with their community. They have a lot of online lesson plans for teachers specifically, just so people are able to teach from their classrooms about the Tower of London. They have free school visits, but specifically for schools that hit criteria. I know that they had to have, I believe it's like a 15% population of students who are special needs. And they also need about 25% of students are unable to pay for, that are unable to pay for a specific amount of it. I think that this is a good way to do it just because it allows kids who aren't typically able to do this to be able to. But also, I think that not everyone in a school district makes the same amount of money, so you're kind of pushing others aside just because of these other ones. And it, I understand they need to make money at some point, but also it kind of sucks that not every kid is able to go for free. They also engage with other generations as well. So they have podcasts, blogs, TikToks, and Instagrams. What's really interesting is that the assistant of historic buildings, he actually has his own TikTok account and he'll go into the museum and show you different objects and give you almost like a cool little history lesson about it, which I thought was a really cool engagement, specifically for like Gen Z. They also have a lot of the past online exhibits and they're all posted online, which I thought was really interesting just because you're able to see past exhibits that probably aren't on display just because they need to be conserved. They also have online videos that go along with the exhibits. So if you're not someone who's able to go and see it in person, you can also learn about it from your room. So accessibility has been a huge topic of discussion, especially in museums, because the history of museums is very cloudy, especially since it started with only the rich and wealthy being able to have access to these museums. So in a sense, it is accessible for people. The tickets are very expensive, which I wasn't expecting, especially for something that was just what it is. Um, but also, it is accessible. In hindsight, it kind of is, but not really. So, because the Tower of London is so old, It has very narrow passageways that aren't accessible for people who are in wheelchairs or walkers. They don't have elevators because the building is so old. Or if they do, they don't go all the way up. And they also have very narrow and off-centered flooring. So even if you did have a wheelchair, you would most likely get stuck and wouldn't be able to go over the bumps. Accessibility is a huge aspect of the museum's goers' personal experience. And I think that with the Tower of London specifically, if you aren't able-bodied and you aren't physically able to, I think it could be potentially difficult. They do have resources for people to help, but it that doesn't exactly make anything that much better. Um, Otherwise, I think the Tower of London is a very interesting collection. I'm very excited to see Princess Diana's revenge dress, which is on display there, which is my personal favorite. They have her entire collection, which is really interesting, and a bunch of other ceremonial gowns. If you're really into fashion, this is definitely the exhibit for you, specifically historical fashion. Um, I'm very sorry I couldn't be there to present to you today. But I hope all of you guys have a great day, and I'm very excited to go. Have a good day, guys. Bye.